everybody. My name is Matt Hardy. I am the Program Director for Planning and Policy here at AASHTO. Just as a side note, I just sent an email out to all of the participants who signed up for these webinar series with another copy of the actual link to use to connect via web. And I also sent out a link where you can go download the slide deck. If for some reason it doesn't work in terms of connecting via the web, you can always follow along by downloading the actual PowerPoint or PDF file and following along that way. So look for that email from me if you are having technical difficulties with that. But in theory, we have about 92 actual attending the webinar, the web portion of this, so it is working. And I'm thinking that it might have something to do on the participants' end as opposed to our end. But we're trying to do as much as we can to sort of help you out with that. Following along, so welcome to Webinar 3. This is the third one in our planned sort of 12-part transportation asset webinar series that is being sponsored by both FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, and AASHTO. So thank you very much to FHWA for helping us out with this. There will be, I guess, 9 more of these after today over the next 18 or so months. So we'll have more information on the other topics coming up. So the topic of this webinar is about asset management business models and barriers to implementation. Again, this is the third one. The first one was on sort of safety assets. The second one was on performance management. So webinars are being held about every 2 months, and the next webinar is going to be on asset management and risk management, and it'll be held on May 8th, 2013 at 2 p.m. And for more information on these webinars, if you want to sign up again, I'm going to send information for other people to sign up, or if you want to look at archives of the previous webinars from and one that we did last year, you can go to the Subcommittee on Asset Management website, tam.transportation.org, click on webinars, and you'll have all the great information there. You can also go to FHWA's website and link to it from there as well. But I forget their website address off the top of my head, and I'm sure Steve will remind us about what that is shortly. So if you have any future suggestions on future webinar topics, have any questions for the questions for the presenters during today's webinar, you can use the Q&A functionality, which if you're in the live meeting program, if you look on the top sort of bar there or ribbon or whatever Microsoft calls it, there's a thing called Q&A. Click on that, and you can type in questions, and we as the moderators will get them towards the end of our discussion or webinar after the presenters are finished today. Just some phone logistics. People are doing a great job of this, but please mute your phone. We have entered what we call lecture mode. Everybody's phone by default is actually muted. If for some reason you want to unmute yourself, you can do *6, but please don't unless you're one of the actual presenters. This helps with keeping extraneous noises outside noises. If people put us on hold, we're not going to wonderful music or anything like that. So we are in the what we call a lecture mode, and if you have to, again, *6, especially for the presenters, that unmutes your individual line. And before I turn it over to Steve, I just want to make 2 more announcements. First is that the AASHTO Subcommittee on Maintenance and the Subcommittee on Asset Management is going to be having a joint conference July 22nd to the 25th, 2013 in Burlington, Vermont. If you're interested in joining, if you're a state DOT, please come. If you're not a state DOT, please come. It'll be a great conference. Again, it's a joint conference between asset management and maintenance, and there's information. If you go to www.transportation.org, click on meetings, you can go to the conference registration site, all that good stuff. And then the second little announcement is that the 10th National Transportation Asset Management Conference is set for April 22nd through the 24th, excuse me, in Miami, Florida. Please put that on your, that's in 2014, FYI, so April of 2014, not this year, next year. Please put that on your calendars. There's going to be a lot of great activities, training sessions, actual conference, technical sessions going on. Again, the core dates are sort of Tuesday through Thursday, but there's going to be a lot of stuff going on, and I would mark out that entire week, Sunday through Saturday, so to get down there, participate in the different training workshops that we're going to be having, etc. But I just want to make that announcement and let you know. Again, April 22nd to 24th, 2014 in Miami, Florida. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Gay from FHWA.
Hey, thank you there, Matt and Yana. Matt referenced the FHWA Asset Management website. You can visit www.fhwa.doc.gov/asset, or just Google FHWA Asset Management. It's been a pleasure conducting these webinars in cooperation with AASHTO. Upcoming webinars include asset management in transportation planning, asset management and highway preservation, then asset management and adaptation to climate change in working with extreme events, and then working with highway data. It's a pleasure producing this webinar on asset management business practices and organization structure. Often when we visit state DOTs and other agencies, the issue is, well, how are they conducting business? Where is asset management in the organization? Do they have a separate office? Is it in planning? Is it in maintenance? Is it elsewhere? And other issues pertain to that. What tools do they use? Also, as we go into different agencies, there's different levels of maturity. Some organizations that have very complex pavement and bridge management systems. They have good data and inventory of other assets. I think a key issue as we look at different agencies is having that agency champion, leadership support, and the communication through the agency of what the practices are, how information is used, how decisions are made, and how it all ties to funding and decision making. Today we're going to cover the asset management business models that several agencies have set up. It's a real pleasure to welcome an international colleague from Alberta, where some of their approaches are different than you commonly see in the U.S., and I think you're all going to get some good information from them, along with Colorado and New York. Let me pass it back to Yana.
Thank you, Steve. So we have a webinar today where we have transportation agencies, and as Steve mentioned, one international agency, and they're going to be representing different asset management models and share their experiences with us and also share their lessons learned. The models that will be presented focus on a combination of organizational structure, governance models, different processes, and information support for transportation asset management. Each of these varying in importance in each of these agencies. The presentations will also cover a historic context for the business models that are in place today, meaning that the models tend to evolve as agencies change, as well as the maturity of their asset management program evolves over time. And then they'll be sharing what the forces were that has led them to where they are today, and also where they're thinking into the future. So moving on to our webinar objectives. So as Matt mentioned earlier, the purpose of the webinar series is to share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the broad asset management community. And we're really thrilled that so many of you are able to participate today. for this webinar, the primary learning objectives are really, we hope you'll be able to glean from these presentations an understanding of the strengths and limitations of specific asset management models. What are some of the common themes that are across the three presentations, and where are there differences? And we hope that you'll be able to take what you've learned and apply them to your situation. How do the models presented today really specifically help you deal with the problems and opportunities you have in your agency, and that you'll be able to get some familiarity with successful approaches to overcome barriers to implementations that some of you may be encountering. So we hope that the webinar will provide insights into the importance of aligning and integrating your agency's asset management business model with your organizational units, systems, and data. So let's move on to the agenda. So the agenda today will kick off by, we already kicked off by hearing Matt and Steve. I'm going to introduce each of our speakers before each presentation, but in brief, our first presentation will be from Scott Richrath from the Colorado DOT. Our next presentation will be from Turaj Nasseri from Alberta Transportation, and our third speaker will be New York State DOT. We're going to have time for questions and answers at the end. So during this webinar, if you have a question, please use the Q&A function that's on the menu bar of the website and type in your question. For those of you who may be having trouble connecting, just send an email to Matt, and he'll field them and he'll collect all of them, and we'll address them in the order they've been received. And if we run out of time, we'll do our best to answer them and get back to you on that. Okay, so let's move on to our first speaker. Our first State DOT presentation is from Colorado DOT. Scott Richrath is the Transportation Performance Branch Manager, and Scott is going to be talking about CDOT's asset management program, structure, and the barriers to implementation. Scott.
Thank you, Hannah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. So I'm going to cover two basic things. I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of the barriers that we've had here at implementation. I'd say we're a mid-level maturity asset management state DOT. And I'm also going to provide kind of an update on where we're at today and how recent initiatives have really forced us to move forward our asset management program. So if you look at the next slide, just a quick overview of Colorado and the DOT. We consider ourselves a fairly average state as far as not geographic size goes, but as far as transportation goes. We get about 2% of federal distributions. We have about 2% of the lane miles, so we're pretty typical. One of our major recent initiatives is that we've recently consolidated engineering regions. So we've moved from having 6 engineering regions to now having 5, and that entailed a consolidation of our I-70 corridor with the metro area of Denver to oversimplify things. And that, you can imagine, has had a major impact on staff and staff resources. That, asset management, and a host of other initiatives have all had to kind of fight and elbow one another for time commitment of staff. So I'll talk about 3 barriers specifically on the next slide. We'll look at resources, technology, and communication in the first half of this presentation. So as we talk about resources on the next slide, I'm going to look not only at human resources, but also at the resource of time. So let's look at the chart that we have for the Colorado DOT Asset Management Program, and without forcing folks to strain their eyes and read every name on there, this is the overall structure of asset management at CDOT. We have a Transportation Commission that's appointed by the governor. We have 11 members on that commission, and 4 are part of a newly formed Asset Management Committee that was created in September of last year. That committee has met every month and has really helped us as staff kind of shape a course of direction for bringing the individual assets all into one one area where we can do analysis at a multi-asset level. We have several members of senior management then that serve as our oversight committee, including our chief engineer and our chief financial officer and one of our regional transportation directors. And then what we try to do is provide as much communication as we can to external stakeholders. But the point I want to get across here is that of all the names you see on this slide, before asset management appeared in MAP 21, before asset management became a committee of the Transportation Commission, each and every one of these individuals had a full-time job. So we've created a matrix organization. We have not created a new structure or new office. We've simply inserted a place of communication and a place where we can convene either at a large level with a number of stakeholders within the department or at a task force level with, say, half a dozen stakeholders in the department in order to accomplish new initiatives for overall or broad-based asset management within CDOT. So looking at the next slide, what has that done? The resource is that blue line that you see. It's the ability to analyze all the new information that we have. Technology has really enabled state DOTs to capture a lot more information, a lot more data. But the gap that we're finding and the gap that grows year after year after year is the gap of the ability of that existing staff base to do the analysis of all that information. So I think there's an expectation level from folks making the highest level decisions within the organization that all this new analysis we have should be driving instantaneously better decisions. But the bottom line is that as staff, we have not grown for 2 decades approximately at CDOT. So we still have the same level of staff trying to tackle additional analysis now in the area of asset management. So that really kind of translates into the next area that I want to tackle, which is technology. And folks will probably stop and right away assume, yeah, without really strong technology, you can't do that analysis. But I'm going to actually throw a curve at that and say you have to be careful of not having necessarily not enough technology, but perhaps over-relying on technology. And I'm going to give one specific example of the over-reliance on technology and how that can, in some cases, stymie the human element or stymie the analysis that needs to occur on a day-to-day basis among the managers within the department. So just to give a brief overview, on the next slide, you'll see what asset management has looked like at CDOT, and it kicked off in the mid-90s with bridge and pavement, the other state DOTs, and we right away developed strong systems, processes, and technology platforms to help support analysis for those 2 assets. And so as we turned into the next century, we started asking ourselves, what other areas of asset management could we look to leverage some of the lessons learned from bridge and pavement and begin applying asset management concepts to those other assets? So as you look at the next 10 years for CDOT, beginning in 2001, we continued developing asset management, and on the horizon, we knew that we had an enterprise software coming in 2006. So in about late 2004, we began working with a vendor and working throughout the department to develop a financial base, but an enterprise resource planning system, and for us, that was SAP, that would better enable us to capture financial information on every transaction that was occurring at CDOT. Well, that had some ups and downs. The ups were that we knew we would have better reporting capability, but some of the downside of that was that we kind of put all other technology evolution on hold. And the executive director and governor, in fact, said, let's focus our efforts from a technology standpoint on delivering SAP successfully. So folks in the regions were moving forward under the assumption that SAP would solve a lot of asset management problems, be able to start picking up inventory of guardrail and signs and signals all through SAP. And the problem was, though SAP is a robust financial-driven software, we didn't get all the processes in place in order to accomplish that in SAP. So in this case, technology served to advance certain program areas, but also to thwart others. And that's my key takeaway on a potential barrier to implementation and an over-reliance on technology. So the final of my 3 barriers is obviously communication. And within the area of communication, you have to decide how much communication is enough. Some people say no no amount of communication is too much. But given the number of initiatives state DOTs have going on, it's hard to pick up every little nugget, every little piece of information that comes your way and know how to filter it, determine what's important, what's going to impact your day-to-day job, and what will not be important, what you can neglect. So as we go back again, on the next slide, we'll take a look one more time at that same structure that we have at CDOT, this asset management structure, and we'll start to realize what communication means now that you start bringing all these different players into the arena of asset management. How do you begin to convey the decisions being made at those top levels all the way through the organization? Our commission subcommittee on asset management made a decision early on that asset management committee meetings would be by invitation only. And that was a culture shift for us at CDOT. We've typically had open meetings where people were allowed to attend when they thought it was relevant to them. So that meant staff supporting asset management in that committee, and I as lead staff now had to find ourselves communicating information secondhand to the rest of the staff that needed to have that information real time or close to real time in order to moving forward on action items, moving forward on decisions made at the highest level. So I'd say since formation of that committee in July, we've gone from spending maybe 5% of our time on communication regarding asset management to 25 to 50% of our time on communication, and that would include the presentations that we put together now for this committee to meet on a monthly basis. So we've shifted a lot of the existing resources from actual work product to communication, but those were existing resources. We didn't have new resources to draw upon in doing that. If you were to poll staff at CDOT and ask them how are we doing on communication of asset management, we'd still get a fairly low rating because we're still not doing enough. I know that I sent an email out to our regional directors asking the question, hey, those of you that have not been able to keep pace with asset management, let me know if you want me to convene a separate meeting. And I got, I think in jest, a reply email saying, Scott, tell me again what asset management is. So that speaks to the difficulty you can have in a state getting the word out as you try to communicate. What we've done that you'll see on the next slide is we've just recently set up an intranet site specific to staff so we can begin to track what we're doing in asset management, and I think we're about to roll that out this week or next. Those three issues really are the three barriers to implementation, and now in the second half of the presentation I want to give just kind of a quick update on where we're at CDOT and how a major program is, for better or worse, forcing us to move ahead on asset management with or without MAP 21. Let's take a look at the next slide, and I'll kind of give an overview of some of the things we're doing today as a result of MAP 21 and as a result of newfound spotlight on asset management, in large part because of the interest of our Transportation Commission and our Executive Director. We have a multi-asset management system today that brings a number of assets, not just pavement and bridges, but also fleet equipment, maintenance levels of service program, and intelligent transportation systems into a single platform where we can provide programmatic level assessment of our different assets to our decision makers. We created a pilot project task force which brings to the table for CDOT a fairly substantial amount of money for pilot projects. We were able to gain $1.5 million from the Transportation Commission to try new innovative efforts within asset management. One such effort, for example, would be applying bridge sensors to one bridge on the state highway system in order to determine real-time impacts of heavy loads traveling across those bridges. We just kicked off a risk-based scoring system pilot where we'll attempt to address some of the underserved assets within the department that don't already have an established asset management system. And then, of course, MAP 21 is requiring all state DOTs to develop risk-based asset management plans, and we will kick ours off at the end of this month. We'll begin developing that plan. But one project that's driving workload for a lot of staff throughout the department and a lot of attention even outside of the department is the responsible acceleration of maintenance and partnerships, or RAMP, which the Executive Director and Governor announced in December. And the intent there is over a 5-year period to accelerate about $300 million of construction activity, which for us is not quite a doubling of our construction program, but about a growth of 50%. And I'll show you now on the next slide how that's had an impact on the asset management program. In past years, each of the individual asset managers for about half of our billion-dollar-a-year budget would deliver individual presentations with a budget request, and they'd give us a pretty good in-depth overview to the Transportation Commission of what the projected condition of their assets would look like over the next 1, 5, 10, 20, and in some case 50 years. We were asked to consolidate that, and RAMP helped drive some of the consolidation. And on the next slide, we'll see what RAMP established as criteria for determining whether or not you had a RAMP-eligible asset management program. That is, whether the program that you managed was eligible to partake in some of that $300 million a year. At the commission and executive director level, it was determined that of maintenance and partnerships, about 50% of the $300 million a year would go toward maintenance or preservation, and the other 50% would go toward public-public and public-private partnerships. And that would be 50-50 split when you look at a 5-year program. We realize that partnerships take a little bit longer to get off the ground than existing asset management systems. So in the first year, fiscal year 14, that begins July 1, we'll actually have about $160 million to spread among eligible asset management programs. For an asset management program under RAMP to be eligible, it must first be able to demonstrate with a performance measure the benefit of additional investment. And so now you're starting to see the connectivity of MAP 21 and the impact it's having on the department. MAP 21 has a performance measure requirement and an asset management requirement, and we're making that a mandatory linkage in order to garner funding from RAMP. The next slide, you'll see the second criteria, which is that a program must possess an existing or developing asset management system and be able to establish a performance target and minimize cost in achieving that performance target. So we've taken largely a life cycle approach here. We know that MAP 21 requires a risk-based approach, and we'll figure out how to marry those two. But right now we're taking largely a life cycle approach for many of our assets. And the third and final criteria that I'll present to this group is that we must be able to distinguish between annual maintenance activities and capital preservation and replacement. So while we consider our maintenance level of service program to be an asset management program at the annual budget setting level, those activities include things like snow and ice removal. And while in Colorado we spend $60 million on snow and ice removal, at the end of the winter we don't have an asset necessarily to show for that. So for that reason, many of the maintenance level of service activities were determined not to be RAMP eligible, and we're told if you want to have additional funding for signs and signals and guardrail, you need to come back next year with a life cycle-based asset management program. So those are the three basic criteria that I'll present to this group for RAMP eligibility. And on the next slide, you'll just get a quick summary then of all the assets that went before the decision-making group. Those on the left were determined to be RAMP eligible, and those on the right either withdrew or were asked to come back next year with a life cycle performance measure-based asset management program. So you see at the bottom, we've got rockfall mitigation. We've got buildings such as the headquarters building and 600 other office buildings and maintenance sheds throughout the state. Those are not traditional transportation assets that the 50 of us collectively get together and talk about. But those are important in Colorado. They're significant investments, even if we're not discussing them at asset management conferences with our state DOT counterparts. So we determined that it was important to begin analyzing those on a life cycle or risk-based assessment as well. So moving to the next slide, you'll see what a typical life cycle curve looks like for us, and this is one that was developed just over the last year through the work with the Asset Management Committee at the Transportation Commission level. And you'll see the impact that RAMP has on it. And the red line at the bottom, this is for fleet, this is for our snowplow trucks and our large equipment. The red line at the bottom is what would happen to the percentage of useful life of our fleet over time without any additional funding from RAMP. The next two lines, blue and orange, depict what would happen if we had ramp just for the 5 years that we project that we will have it, and then we went back to our baseline level. And the top two lines show what happens if we have ramp funding in perpetuity. So if at the end of the 5-year ramp program we're able to garner from another source those levels of funds going off into the 20-year horizon depicted on this graph, that's how we're able to sustain fleet at its current performance level. The next slide just gives you that same look for our intelligent transportation system assets, but you can see the impact that not raising the baseline budget has that particular program. So RAMP, at least for the next 5 years, will be able to keep that program at its existing level. So drawing toward the end here, as you look at the next slide, we do have some new programs that are developing asset management systems over the course of the next year or so. Culverts is one of those programs. We already have in place a critical culvert program today. Our goal there will simply be able to, as we did with fleet and ITS in the prior two slides, be able to depict to our decision makers what the benefits are of additional investment in the culvert program, and to be able to do that visually so they can make decisions on how much additional funding to provide. On the next slide, you'll get a quick look at our rockfall mitigation and how that's actually a risk-based project where we're attempting to address the corridors with rockfall mitigation sites that have the highest possibility or probability of risk. Risk is defined essentially as probability and consequence for this context. So those corridors will actually get additional funding under RAMP that they would not have had previously. And then on the next slide, you'll see the headquarters building at CDOT, some of the other buildings, and we have essentially a level of service assessment that we make on each of those, working with our folks in the regions. And we typically tend to average about a B level of condition, and we'll be able to, a year from now, depict how additional funding for capital preservation of our buildings will help us sustain that B level. So as we go to the next slide, that will wrap up the presentation. I broke it into two pieces. I know I went through a lot of slides rather quickly, but that gives you an overview of some of the barriers and how we're working to achieve them, and then where we're at and what additional funding in the recent months done to move the program forward. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Scott. We really appreciate your historical perspective on CDOT's asset management program, but also really exciting to hear about RAMP, and I think we're going to have you come back next year and tell us how it's going and if it's actually affecting the kind of change that you hope. There is a lot of information on these slides, and but Matt sent you the link, but also on the AASHTO site and the Federal Highway site, the full set of slides will be up, so you can look at the details at your own leisure after the webinar. Our next speaker is Taraj Nasseri from the Alberta Transportation Ministry, and he is the director of the transportation. Is Alberta Infrastructure and Transportation's director and program sponsor for the Transportation Infrastructure Management System. He's also an adjunct professor at the University of Alberta, where he teaches a graduate course in Knowledge and Innovation Management. We're going to hear from Taraj on embedding asset management in the information management system. Taraj.
Oh, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Responding to the theme of the webinar, I'm going to talk about a model that we have designed and executed for asset management. TIM stands for Transportation Infrastructure Management System. The I is for infrastructure, not for information. That's why I call this model embedding asset management into an information system. TIM is an integrated system of web applications designed for the lifecycle management of Alberta's provincial highway assets. I like to mention that we look at asset management in a lifecycle context, because mostly people think that you have some assets and you're going to manage it. we actually broadened this definition to encompass all the work we do before we actually design or decide to actually design or create an asset. So next slide. I like to start with our vision and mission because they basically drove our modeling or our model design for asset management. I like to sort of read just the mission. We are supposed to deliver lifetime optimum transportation asset performance. And we define that those performance dimensions are to be safe, effective, efficient, environmentally sound, and innovative infrastructure. Maybe this is what we share with all DOTs too, I presume. Next one. So the business drivers, why did we really go towards this asset management? We were really had to do that because of these drivers. We mid-1990s, I think, we did a large-scale downsizing, although our mission did not change. We decided to outsource all engineering and construction work, and overnight, without perhaps recognizing, we all became asset managers. So major changes in business model. We had many legacy applications that were inefficient and non-responsive to business needs. We also wanted to preserve, enhance, and value maximization of our knowledge assets, which in our view is as important, if not more important, than physical assets. And this involves, obviously, information assets and human capital. So next one defines our mission. That's how we started. Say, okay, harnessing information technology for maximizing the lifetime socioeconomic value of investment in transportation assets. So asset management was to be directed towards lifetime maximum value. So we looked at infrastructure asset analysis management scope very broadly. I just go quickly at what are the locations, attributes, and conditions, and capacities and functions of the existing asset. We look at all our assets, where they are, what they do, what new or enhanced assets are essential to meet expected socioeconomic needs, what assets or asset enhancements would deliver the highest socioeconomic value, what is the best time to execute the investment decisions, what are the lifetime performance impacts of the investment in each asset creation or enhancement, develop and manage programs that result from asset analysis, measure the real impacts, and learn from performance measurements, and introduce change. So it's a full cycle, learning cycle model in our asset analysis. One of the first things we did was really to look at our entire organizations, every section, every branch, every division, and do an asset or process analysis, I should say, and find out what each process did and what data and information they needed, what decision they had to make. And that really formed the backbone of our modeling teams. And this was very, very, I think, important, critical to us, and I certainly strongly recommend organizations to look at what they do and all their processes before really they delve into developing asset management systems. If you see value chain or value system, it starts with transportation needs, department policy goals, goes to studies and planning, program development, program delivery, performance assurance, and ultimately it ends up in social economic value. And TIMS across the board impacts every component of this value chain. So that's, in fact, if you like, another way of presenting the life cycle nature of TIMS that impacts everything we do. And the next one, just look at to tell you how the value of our network assets. We have something like over 30,000 kilometers roads, 4,000 bridges and related structures. They involve major culverts too. And we have 1 million supporting objects and structures. Some people call them road furnitures. These are all kind of things like automated traffic recorders, boards, lights and signals, and small culverts, Texas gates, and all the other things. Collectively, we call them appurtenances. Only civil engineers can pronounce it too. Value of our total assets, about $70 billion. We spend more or less annually something like $1.5 billion on it, and annual operation budget $0.4 billion. So that's the size of the assets we are managing. Next. This was TIM's scope. After doing that process analysis, we just came up with this scope for TIM. We wanted to have web-based integrated system, so all classes of assets, bridges, pavements, all the other things are integrated in one system. Business critical information, how do we actually look at our assets and convert them into information that our analytics or decision support system could use to make decisions. Decision analysis application that uses that information, then that will really bring you to decisions, and you have to now execute them, and another set of programs, applications, which we call program management application, will kick in. And integration or retirement of legacy system was also part of our scope. As we were introducing the new system, we had to retire the legacy system too. And integrated knowledge transfer, we had extensive program of knowledge transfer across our province, which you call state over there, to transfer knowledge to just everyone part of the ministry. So our asset management was really encompassed the whole ministry. It wasn't necessarily a section or a branch. It's really mobilized the entire ministry. Transactional and transformational system, we had two types of application, ones that actually automated our transactions and improved efficiency, and that also gave us the opportunity, building this in-house, and I'll explain shortly why we decided to do that, enable us to incorporate a number of what we call transformational applications, which change the way, fundamentally the way we actually do business. And accessible to staff and contractors. Very important that after we outsourced, we relied a lot on consultants and contractors and outsourcing organizations, and we built this system for our partners too, for the entire community of transportation, not only for our staff. So they would have access to it, and that has proved to be very, very efficient in the way we actually manage these big contracts. Next. What can TIMS do? Create a single, comprehensive, current, and reliable data information analytics accessible to all staff and contractors working on our better transportation projects. Enables efficient collection, preservation, and updating of business-critical information. Enables rigorous engineering, economic, environmental evaluation of projects and programs. And enables collaborative problem-solving and project execution. And provides an effective web-based learning tool. We actually use TIMS to transfer knowledge, not just about how to use TIMS, but about how the department operates. Next one. Why we decided to develop TIMS in-house, and this was after doing a lot of soul searching and looking at a number of options. So ultimately we decided to develop it in-house, and these were the reasons. Obviously, we wanted to capture tacit and explicit knowledge of the staff in the software. We have a number of experienced staff been working on these projects, and as you all know, this is a global problem. Some of them are very close to retirement, so we use this opportunity to capture their knowledge. Alignment of people, processes, and practices with technology. Although we have a lot of experts in transportation engineering, and civil engineering, but they are not all very IT savvy, and this provides an opportunity for bringing up that knowledge and understanding of how actual software engineering happens and how actually software is built. So it's a very good opportunity for them to learn this. Opportunity to improve prevailing processes and practices through TIMS. Every process we looked at before we tried to automate it and develop an application to support it, we had the opportunity, our business experts and managers and everyone else had an opportunity to bring in innovation into our processes. So we said, let's innovate before we automate it. And that was also very effective. Concurrent training and richer learning experience for the business. Obviously, we not just teaching people how to use TIMS, but during development of TIMS, our business people and staff were very much involved, and they learned a great deal. Next. Okay, this is, if you like, the model. Since this webinar is about model, the model of actually developing or building an asset management system. We have in the center the program and application sponsors at SME. This was very much a business-driven development. The IT industry for many years, and still have it, has had this challenge of not being entirely aligned and responsive to business. They built basically the system that they liked and the business sometimes didn't. So the only way, in our view, you can actually overcome this challenge is to allow the business to lead the development. So we have program sponsors in the middle, the red, basically driving everything, which started on the northeast of the diagram. So it says planning. You can see the planning, requirements, definition, then analysis and design, the implementation of the software, system testing. UAT stands for user accepted testing. That's where the business comes in, actually says, yes, this is the application I wanted, this is the requirements I wanted to be in that application. And then we transition to application maintenance support, and then we provide post-transition support, and we also retire the legacy systems and knowledge transfer that goes around after the application goes into production. And you see an integrated system, extremely effective. We produce a lot of applications in relatively short period of time. So I certainly recommend this system of bringing in business and subject matter experts to drive the software engineering process. Next, please. Okay, that's another way of showing how do we actually make sure that TIMS is responsive to the business, aligned with business strategies. And look at that as we call it a strategy map. You have the mission at the top that drives divisional goals. And then these are the processes, set policies, standards, and best practices, deliver planning and programming, deliver infrastructure services. And TIM's business sponsors come from those different branches and make sure that what we build is actually responsive to the processes and divisional goals. And you have at the bottom TIM's development and delivery team. So I, as a business, as a program sponsor and development director, basically made sure that these two bottom rectangles work together.
Turaj, I just want to remind you that you have about 5 minutes remaining.
I'll run through these quickly. This is basically our data repository in the middle and our model. We have information applications, we have decision applications, or called analytics. We have program management applications, a group of applications. We have administrative applications, which really manages the data repository, and communication applications that you really communicate with the data repository, a multimedia communication with our data repository. Next, please. Come on. Hello? Okay, and next, we can run through that. Next, this is one of our sort of what we call rationalization, optimization, where a number of applications in bridges, pavements, and other things really provide information to a system which really integrates all this into one rationalization of programs and applying cost-benefit analysis to optimize them in terms of value. Next one, please. I think this is our bridge information system. I'll just read very quickly. Contains inventory and inspection data of all structures and public roads outside urban areas. Record inventory of structure and initiate and record inspections, maintain inspector list, and contractor and municipality access via extranet portal. This is the bridge information system of TIMS. Next one, please. This is for more strategic planning, network expansion support system based on safety and geometric analysis. We recommend work activities, grade widening, four laning, curve improvements, traffic signals, and intersection lighting. I don't go through this, so next one, please, because that's probably you understand. Road of functions is to do with optimization and prioritization based on cost-benefit analysis. Next one. Okay, this just shows it in a different one, so we can skip that. We're going to skip this one too. I've already mentioned that. Skip that one. I want to get to. Okay, this is the program management application. After you make the decisions, it really deals with all the transactional issues that involve in managing programs and projects, like tender administration, contract administration, progress reporting, and etc. Next, please. Future development, enhancing data management and decision application based on feedback from users and best practices. We continue doing that. Develop a talent repository to complete information to a knowledge system, integrating unstructured data and textual analytics. I think that's very important. And completing risk analysis and management applications, refining the investment decision model to account for uncertainties and externalities, incorporating evolving technological innovations, apps for mobile devices. Next, please. Okay, that's it.
Now you rush.
All I have to say.
Yes.
Was I on time?
Yeah, I think you beat your time. So, Taraj, if you wanted to just share in terms of time spectrum, how recently you've implemented TIMS and how long you've actually been running it and affecting asset management in your organization.
As these applications became available, starting with those what I call information applications, they went into production. So we didn't wait to finish everything to go into production. So they became available to the staff and contractors about 5 years ago. Every year we had about 2 of these applications, 2, sometimes 3, going into what we call production, going into service, going live. So we've been doing that, and the last one went live actually about a month ago, and we will have new applications being developed next fiscal year too. So it's an ongoing really activity, and as I said, we basically mobilize the entire ministry. We just think that that's what we are about. That's our mission. Managing those assets on behalf of the public taxpayers to derive maximum value. So we don't really regard it as a section or a separate branch. We think it's about the entire ministry.
Thank you. I think it's a interesting view of how you have really embedded asset management and tied it so integrally to your information system. So our final presentation is from the New York State Department of Transportation. Brad Allen of the New York State DOT's Maintenance Program Planning Bureau is going to share with us NISTOT's experience with their asset management program and their actual business models that are tied to their experience. Brad.
Thanks, Shanna. Good afternoon, everyone. I won't be presenting much historical perspective. All of this goes back about 2 years as it comes to asset management. As it is now defined, anything prior to that really isn't relevant here at New York State DOT. So on the next slide, you'll see the typical, our state is big and complicated too. We have many MPO partners, other transportation authorities. You'll see here 130 public transit operators is an example of how complex the issues around managing assets gets in New York State. So on the next slide, 2 years ago, as we looked to implement asset management, we made an effort to benchmark a few other states and do some research on those who went before us. And we saw a few models as to how people approached asset management, say the angle of approach that they took. Some agencies began implementing performance management, developed a performance management framework, and then applied that to, or expanded that framework to include investment decisions. We saw others that began by expanding their inventory and analysis systems and then placed those tools or the output from those tools in the hands of planners and program managers eventually, with the idea that eventually this method leads to the analysis tools and outputs being integrated into the planning and programming procedures. And the least desirable practice that we didn't find many examples of, but is out there, is to implement whatever is needed to comply with a mandate, usually legislative. Unfortunately, this doesn't generally lead to the continuous improvement process that's necessary for robust asset management. So our approach on the next slide is pretty fundamental. Our leadership decided to cut what I would say is directly to the chase. With aging infrastructure, flatline budgets, downward condition trends for our assets, we knew we needed to change our programming strategies quickly. Our prime objective was to improve the return on investment of our program. To make an impact as quickly as possible, we focused on existing data systems and using our existing analysis tools to improve the programming process, so decisions would be driven first by what the data is telling us. To do this, we knew we needed to break through traditional bureaucracy, and it was very necessary to implement a common investment strategy across our 11 regions. Our programming is done for our capital program is developed in 11 separate regions and then rolled up. Two key decisions were made early on. First, we would employ the principles of asset management as laid out in the AASHTO guides. And second, that we would focus our attention on the big picture. One of the terms we kept coming back to, or the sayings, is you can't optimize a system by trying to optimize each component of that system. So on the next slide, you'll see the management framework that we put in place. This is not an organizational chart. At this point, asset management has no formal organization at NYSDOT. We do have an asset management champion, and I'll describe his role as we go through this. The capital program delivery team at the top of the chart is our high executive leadership, who has, the position to the authority to direct everything here at DOT, so they have the overall responsibility. The comprehensive program team, the next step down, is really the executive leadership for asset management. Below that are our statewide management teams. These are made up of management and technical experts in the areas of bridge, pavement, safety, and sustainability. You'll see that coming up a few more times in my presentation. And then those teams are mirrored at the regional level for program development. The management teams are diverse in areas of expertise, and the statewide teams are also diverse geographically, including both main office and regional staff. These four areas, pavement, bridge, safety, and sustainability, were identified as our highest priority areas and the areas for which we had the most and best data to begin. Through this management framework, we feel we've been able to generate more consistent decision-making. We've set consistent performance measures and established appropriate targets across the state. We can better ensure accountability. We can guide local and regional decisions for preservation of the system more consistently. And we can make centralized decisions to direct system renewal and strategic enhancement projects, the major capital work, to where they're most needed. On the next slide, I'll get into a little bit of detail on the comprehensive program team. This team is chaired by Rod Sechrist, who is our asset management champion. There are 13 members of the CPT, and they are executive and high-level managers from across the department. These are some generic titles that I've included so you can understand where they come from versus bringing in specific New York State DOT titles. And Rod Sechrist is also our Assistant Commissioner for Operations and Asset Management. So he is the one person right now who has asset management as part of his organizational title. Next slide, you'll see the CPT the comprehensive program team very quickly adopted what we call our Forward 4, which are principles that establish our agency's asset management values. Preservation first is a recognition that we are in constrained fiscal times right now, and our first responsibility is as stewards of the public's transportation assets. System, not projects, relates back to our system approach. Each project or each asset is a component of a larger system. When we make decisions about a project or a treatment on an asset, we work to choose the option that creates the best outcome for the system. To give an example, on a larger scale, we develop our 5-year program trying to optimize conditions at a 10-year time horizon. Maximizing return on investment is just a statement of our commitment to do everything we can to provide the public with the greatest value for their tax dollars. And make it sustainable recognizes that we have a long-term commitment to the health and vitality of our society and environment. And these 4 really guide everything that we do with asset management. On the next slide, you'll see how this impacts our programming decisions. Get a little bit into how we then use this to manage our assets. What came out of the comprehensive program team was guidance for our 5-year program and 5-year STIP update that was a dramatic departure and improvement over business as usual here in New York. Policy and project selection criteria became consistent across all the regions. We recognize not all regions have the same conditions or demands on their system, but they do have the same policies, practices, and tools, as well as performance measures. So to put the program together from the top down, removing some stovepipe funding categories like safety and CMAQ, transit, are removed from the top. The remaining highway funds were split into 3 allocation programming processes. First, a very small percentage, you'll see as regional capital, was allocated to each region to be used at their discretion for capital or preservation needs. That gave them flexibility within the program to tackle their highest priorities. The majority of the funding was reserved for our preservation or beyond preservation programs. The next slide highlights some compares and contrasts these programs. 60% of our funding was directed to the preservation program in direct support of our Preservation First principle. Regions were allocated funds so that each region got an equal percentage of their overall preservation need. The use of these funds was then limited to treatments that extend the lives of existing assets. Those preservation needs that were used to establish the allocations were determined by the statewide management teams for pavement and bridge. And to do that, they used our bridge and pavement management systems. The regions were then instructed to use those same systems to build 5-year programs to optimize their asset conditions in year 10. So the same systems that are being used by the statewide groups to set regional expectations are then used by the regions to deliver on those expectations. Finally, 25% of the funds were placed in what we call Beyond Preservation Program, which is our major enhancements. These funds were allocated at a project-by-project level by statewide competition. So those funds would be delivered to the projects that delivered the most benefit to the state. Projects were selected in 4 categories: bridge, pavement, safety, mobility, and sustainability. So on the next slide, we'll get into how we prioritize these projects. One more. There we go. First, each of these 4 program teams, statewide management teams, developed an objective measure to measure the quality of each project submission. This allowed us to compare a bridge replacement in Queens, say, with a deck replacement in Buffalo. It doesn't, however, allow us to compare projects across programs, like either of those to a highway reconstruction. Standard project submission forms were created by each asset team, and this allowed us, again, to customize between program areas, but each program was standard across all of our 11 regions and for every MPO. Projects were prioritized and recommended for selection by the statewide management teams, those the technical working groups. Those recommendations went up to the comprehensive program team, and that team looked to balance needs across the 4 programs and looked for ways, or synergistic opportunities, if you will, for programs that are projects that may impact multiple programs at the same time. And then final approval was issued by the executive level capital program delivery committee at the top of the chart earlier on. The next slide shows the results of our new program, which we feel pretty strongly speak for themselves. We have years of experience with our pavement and bridge prediction models, and we have a lot of confidence in what they tell us. Unfortunately, funding is not sufficient to produce a positive slope where conditions will actually be rising over the next 5 years, but we can now show and feel confident that we are getting the most from every dollar that is entrusted to us by the public. So what's next? On the next slide, we have several things. We have a fairly full plate. We need to improve the integration of capital and maintenance programs. We need more robust pavement and bridge modeling tools. We need an ability to do trade-off across programs and determine how much improvement in the pavement system is equal to how much improvement in the bridge system, for example. We need an organizational home for asset management. And we need a corporate performance management framework. And with that, we need to incorporate customer expectations and level of service definitions. And then finally, or maybe not finally, but as we do this, we need to develop an asset management plan. And I listed here to be compliant with MAP 21, but that is not the driving force behind our asset management plan. It's the recognition that we need that in order to successfully move forward with these next steps. So moving along, some other initiatives that we already have underway. This is a slide regarding our Enterprise Asset Management Program, which is our asset management system that we're beginning implementation of. This slide shows the time frame for our requirements gathering. We don't plan to have the whole thing implemented by January of next year. This is just to gather the requirements for this comprehensive system. Implementation will progress in a rolling fashion with 1 to 3 modules at a time, and we plan full implementation for all these modules: pavement, bridge, asset trade-off, maintenance management, facilities, you can see there, within 5 years. This is a fairly aggressive timeline, and we are planning on having bridge management and pavement management, as well as cross-program trade-off, in place in time for our next biennial STIP update. That's about 2 years. We'd like to be using our new, more robust management systems. To do that, on the next slide, you'll see the organization chart we put in place, the organization we put behind this project, with our executive level steering committee, project sponsors, which are program area leaders from the modules being developed, a project management team, and teams of subject matter experts. And you'll see some similarities to our earlier asset management structure. As we begin implementing the large system, we need to pull in all these business areas. So we've based our project management structure on our asset management structure. Our asset management champion is both project sponsor and on the steering committee. The project management team includes members of our comprehensive program team, and the statewide management teams will be used to lead the focus groups for each module and be those subject matter experts for developing the module. And if we need to reach out to others, they'll be the ones telling us who to reach out to. And the other effort we have going forward is development of our asset management plan. And here again, we know we're going to have to pull in resources from all around the department. So the effort will be driven by and directed by our comprehensive program team. We have a 4-person project team for project management, which includes our asset management champion, another member of the comprehensive program team, a project manager, and an FHWA liaison. And then we'll be pulling resources as needed for each part of the asset management plan. Again, for whenever we can, for safety, for each asset, we'll be reaching out to those statewide management teams, or for other subjects like finances or something else, we'll be reaching out to members of the comprehensive program team like the CFO or people from our planning office. So we're going to reuse this asset management structure through all of our related asset management efforts. So with that, I thank you for your time. We do feel we've made some rapid success here in New York for implementing asset management, and establishing this management framework has gone a long way to enabling that. But we still have a long way to go, and we plan on leveraging our management framework repeatedly for each of our asset management related initiatives. So, thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks for sharing with us how you're connecting policies, leadership, funding, techniques, and tools, and pulling it all together and getting results out of it. That concludes our presentations for today. I'm going to turn it over to Matt, who's going to go through the questions.
Yes, thanks, Yana. Some of the questions that I've been getting so far is how can I get the presentation? I did email out a link. If you registered for this webinar, you should have an email from me with a link to be able to download it. We'll also make it available along with the recording at tam.transportation.org. So I am just going to start with the first question here and sort of go down the list. So the first one is from, there's actually multiple questions. So it's the first one is for Scott. What items go into your grade ratings for buildings?
For buildings, and when we talk about buildings within the structure that I presented, we're talking specifically about office space and maintenance sheds. And of the two, you might be able to guess where state DOTs put higher priority. It's been the maintenance sheds, not the office space. So for maintenance sheds, we've had criteria on functionality, really, of the individual structures for those sheds. So our equipment, our fleet equipment has tended to grow in size over time, and it's outgrown many of our maintenance sheds. So we've begun to look at compatibility with existing equipment. We also look at maintenance costs as they increase over time and as the structures begin to age. On the office space side, this really was kind of a new question for us, and it was a challenge the executive director put to us to begin to develop quantifiable assessment of office space. We've had historically the ability within the regions to go about through a checklist method, putting a grade to the office space, but we're kind of taking a fresh look at that now and trying to bring in other factors such as ADA compatibility, such as square footage per full-time equivalent employee and things of that nature. So that's something that's being developed right now. Our vendor will have a proposed scoring system to us in April, and then we plan to incorporate that into the multi-asset management system over the course of the remainder of the calendar year.
Okay. For Turaj, is there documentation on the NASS? Is it available? And then also the person is specifically interested in the decision trees and logic applied to the system expansion analyses.
Yes, well, obviously this has been developed in-house, and if they have specific questions or want to find specific more information about any particular application, I think they should contact me. and I think my email is available. Yes, there are decision trees used for input into our rationalization. And so if you, certainly all this documentation are available. Some of it we can release and share. Some we may not be able to. So the best answer I can give is they contact me directly and I can provide additional information that I can.
Great. The next ones are for Brad, and there's sort of two of them here. What does sustainability mean to you as it relates to your sustainability statewide team? And then second, are you planning to optimize at the cross-program level versus trade-off, meaning predicting outcomes of funding level decisions?
Wow, I get the easy ones.
I can repeat those if you want.
What does sustainability mean to us is actually, honestly, a good question. That is one of the things we are working out. And there's sustainability can be described as the three-legged stool, right, with environment and society and economics. But we are working that out. The main reason, I believe, to include it was just the understanding that when we're making our decisions on our program, we need to consider that the program is in the context of perpetually providing government services. And we need to consider that context in what we do. How that relates to specific programming decisions has been at a smaller scale than that, where they've really looked for some focus areas where we could make some improvements in maybe livability or connecting communities, those types of things on a more smaller community scale. And then could you repeat the second one related to?
Sure. Are you planning to optimize at the cross-program level versus trade-off, meaning predicting outcomes of funding level decisions?
Yes. How's that? Yes, we would like to be able to look at different variations of a pavement program and a bridge program at different funding levels, and look at what the outcomes would be for each program at those funding levels, and have some common basis to say that a little bit more to pavement and a little bit less to bridge, or vice versa, is the optimum state that we want our infrastructure to be in. And right now we don't have that comparison, but we would like to be able to.
Okay. And then a follow-up question on the sustainability team for you, Brad, because you are here, from Nancy Albright in Kentucky. What or who makes up the sustainability team at New York State DOT?
I may actually pass this off to someone else at the table, because it's folks from it's led from folks from our planning division, folks from our operations and asset management division. There are folks from engineering, folks from the Office of Environment. There are regional people. We really looked in putting, I think in particular this team together, looked at getting the right people on the team more so than getting people from the right places on the team. So we needed to get the folks who had the best sense of sustainability and what that means for our program. And actually, Rod just handed me a note. Very practically, as we like to try and stay grounded here in New York, we used sustainability or societal impacts, if you will, as a tiebreaker. When we got to capital project selection, if we had two projects that scored out on an infrastructure level about the same, we looked at which one showed some improvement in multimodal connectivity or some of the other topics that we fall under our sustainability umbrella.
Okay. And then just one last follow-up question. This is it for sustainability. Is from Tim Philbach. What assets are associated with sustainability?
I don't think we had any specific assets associated with sustainability. It was more project objectives that drove something to the sustainability teams. Why were you doing the work? If you were doing the work because you had a deficient bridge, then that's a bridge project that they may submit to the sustainability team, because in doing that they're going to add bike lanes, or it will, maybe there's something more innovative involved in it. But if you are doing a project because there is a community or an economic need behind it, then that would have been a sustainability project.
The arterial highway example.
Yeah, right. An example is we have connecting many of our larger towns to, say, an interstate. It would be an arterial, say, divided highway with, somewhat limited access. Intersections, but then also some limited access sections, which ends up being, and then typically the other end of that has been your urban sprawl type development. So you have maybe an older urban center with mixed use, and then away from it you have retail space, and it's connected by this multi-lane highway facility. One of the ideas under sustainability is to, when we reconstruct that or rehab that facility, to add multi-use facilities, convert it to a boulevard where it's vehicle traffic and pedestrian traffic and bicycle traffic, and maybe help connect it to some other community, help get better access to parks or something that may be along the way. That would be an example of a sustainability project.
Okay, thank you. So the next one I think is for you, Scott. It comes from Alan Ward. Because of the timing of this, what is meant by socioeconomic value, and how does pavement and bridge condition levels relate to this concept?
We're thinking in Colorado that might be a question for New York. I don't recall. I'm trying to dig back to the slides here. I don't recall socioeconomic value being part of the decision criteria.
Was that too, Raj?
Yes, certainly. I use the socioeconomic value. When we evaluate our projects, there's obviously the decisions that are purely based on economic consideration, like cost-benefit analysis. But then we have another layer of consideration to do with society, societal value, the impacts on society, impacts on some remote areas that the economics may in fact not favor them, but there are other considerations too. So every project we do has a benefit to society and benefit to the economy, and has to be environmentally sustainable. So we do look at all these three criteria before finalizing our decisions, what gets built and what gets maintained.
Okay. We have two more. The easier one from Jenny Groth. Our local municipalities, required to have an asset management program according to MAP 21, or only state DOTs. And Steve, unless I'm wrong, it's only the state DOTs that are required to have the transportation asset management plans and perhaps the MPOs. But in terms of local DOTs, county DOTs, or cities, I don't think they're required to have them per MAP 21.
Yeah, correct, Matt. Is the state DOTs are required to, when there are NHS routes, the responsibility of the locals should be working with the state DOT as the state develops the asset management plan.
Yeah. But I think the requirement is that for the state DOTs to actually develop it, or have ownership of it. So the last question is from Chris Begley. What hierarchy, and I'm not sure exactly who this one is directed towards. Could be Brad, because of the timing of it, but he asked, or it could be Scott. What hierarchical structure is used to collect, analyze, and report on road pavement information, such as network, area, corridor, route, link, or section?
Well, this is Scott in Colorado, and what we do in Colorado, as we look at the state highway system, approximately 9,000 centerline miles. And every other year we go about collecting data on 50% of those miles. And then we're able to aggregate that data and then break it out to the tier level as necessary based on a linear referencing system and based on the different functional classifications of the system. But we're most familiar with reporting at the state-wide level. What we realize under MAP 21 that we'll have to get more comfortable doing, and we have the technical capability to do this today, is to report at the interstate level, the NHS non-interstate level. We'll figure out how to do the extended or expanded national highway system level. And then how we're going to work for levels beyond that remains to be determined.
Did you want me to answer that as well?
Yes, Brad, if you can.
Yes, we collect our pavement data at a very small segment level. So we're then able to roll it up in lots of different ways. We group our highways by functional class, really. The interstate, we can roll it up to NHS. We have what we call our NHS Plus, which actually with the MAP 21 changes, a lot of what we had as our high priority non-NHS pavements got rolled into NHS. And then we have our state non-NHS state facilities. We can also slice that by, I said we have 11 regions, so we can tell you what the pavement or bridge conditions are on any of those facility types within a region, and we can also roll that up by MPO boundary if needed too, to tell you within a certain MPO area what the conditions are at any of those facilities. Same for bridges, as we collect that on a bridge-by-bridge basis.
Great, thanks, Brad. It's I have 3:31, so I'm going to end the Q&A there. Again, if any of the attendees have any other questions for the participants, I think that many of them are open to receiving those questions via email, and they'd probably be happy to sort of talk with you in more detail. One last shameless plug on my part. Don't forget about our Subcommittee on Asset Management and Subcommittee on Maintenance meeting, July 22nd or 21st through to the 24th in Burlington, Vermont. A lot of good stuff going on. With that, I will turn it over to Jana.
All right, so final slide. Our next webinar will be on May 8th at the same time, same process, and it's going to be on asset management and risk management. So I hope you'll be able to join us. As Steve mentioned earlier, we've determined the next 4, which are related to planning, preservation, climate change, and data. That will be posted shortly on the AASHTO website where you'll be able to register for them. So hopefully you'll also be able to join us for those. Thank you, everyone, and thank you very much to all of our fantastic speakers today. Goodbye.
Quick item.
Yes, Steve.